So I've actually been a fly casting instructor for close to 30 years. But what happened is I took the sport up immediately right after I saw him do that. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. And I tell the people I teach now that I was the worst. I'm not kidding you. The worst. I was all about too much risk. I was all about bringing the rod too far back. I was all about trying to throw it forward instead of what we do with the fly line, which is get it behind us first. I mean, every violation of the foundation and pillars of fly casting instruction, I violated.
That was Dan Johnston talking about whether to break the wrist or to not break the wrist. This is episode number 75 of the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
How's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. Today's episode is sponsored by the Wet Fly Swing Member Society. The Society provides exclusive discounts and access to innovative products and services from our member partner companies. Head over to wetflyswing.com/members to check out some of the companies who are on board. Plus, you can support the podcast at one convenient location. In today's episode, I talk with Dan Johnston, who has worked for St Croix for over 20 years and has been a casting instructor for over 30 years. Dan gets into some casting tips today, talks about where your thumb should be and the difference between rod companies that are out there. Don't miss this as Dan talks about how he went from fly casting catastrophe to master fly casting instructor. This episode is sponsored by Deli Fresh Design, an all-American creator of fine, sustainable fly fishing gear. Stay tuned later in the show to hear how Ross does his part with DLD to reduce waste and impacts as he builds great equipment in a sustainable fashion. You can find fresh equipment designs on Instagram at Deli Fresh Design or at delifreshdesign.com. So, without further ado, here's Dan Johnston from St Croix.
I was kind of blessed. I took to it pretty quickly and worked with Tom Anderson for quite a few years, who was a Sage rep. Did some classes with him for a while and kind of followed his tutelage, and then started teaching on my own. And now I do a lot of the fly casting instruction. Well, like for St. Croix Customer Appreciation Day every year, I'll be the fly casting instructor for that. I shoot all of our fly casting videos on new product releases and things like that. So it's been awesome to go from complete, come from being a complete fly casting train wreck to now being able to help people out. It's really kind of a comical story.
That's cool. So 30 years, that's definitely a nice chunk of time. And you've been, and so is that as long as you've been with St. Croix as well? You started casting instruction and then also working for St. Croix 30 years ago?
No, I was actually working for a local sporting goods store in Iowa City, Iowa when I was attending college, and I got into fly fishing again. I met the gentleman that was working with me at that sporting goods store, and then been with St. Croix now for 20 years. But yeah, I've been teaching fly casting for close to 30. So it was about 10 years before I went to St. Croix, I started to actually instruct. Oh, gotcha. Okay, nice. So great. Well, we'll get into definitely. I want to dig into some of the history of St. Croix. And so now before we get into all that, so you do a little bit of still gear fishing and fly fishing. Is it kind of a 50-50 split, or what do you do more of these days? I do more from the fishing side of things, more conventional now. I still do a lot of fly fishing. But in terms of instruction, it's all fly for me. So it's really an interesting dynamic, because St. Croix being such a multifaceted rod manufacturer, literally we have 822 cataloged items, and it's really put me in a unique position to represent us, because I can cross people over from conventional to fly and vice versa. And, fishing to me is such a, it's just such an awesome sport. There's so many different ways to do it. And fly fishing is certainly one of my favorites. There's so many things that we can do with a fly rod, and certainly the flies that we present that just emulate exactly what those fish are eating. I swear better than anything. And that's the cool part, and getting into the entomology and reading water and learning how to fight fish on light lines or light tippets in the fly fishing verbiage. But it's just been really neat to be able to do both and watch both. Yeah.
Do you think with St. Croix, because I mean, there's a number of companies that do both the conventional and the fly fishing, and I've had Tom Larimer on in past episodes. He's with G. Loomis now. But I mean, if with St. Croix, if you took out the conventional part of it, how would you still have a decent sized company, or would do you think it'd be a struggle to make if you just had to go fly fishing as far as on the business side?
That's a really good question. And I think I would answer that in the way that if we would have started just fly, the way we take care of the angler, St. Croix is angler centric. I mean, we literally exist to make people better on the water. It's what we're all about. So if we would have started in fly and that's all we would do, I have every confidence that we would be rolling with just simply fly, even given the fact that the market in fly, in my view, is not what it was in the post river runs through it days, which I'm sure you've heard a lot. I mean, that was an unbelievable boom in fly, and it's not that right now. So the fact that we are in conventional puts us in a tremendous position of strength to be able to help people even more. But yeah, I think when you practice your business under the mantra of being angler centric in fishing, you can make it. I think it depends on what your vision is. And ours has been one to allow every angler the opportunity to be better on the water, whether it's conventional fly or, freshwater, saltwater. Fly fishing is certainly a significant part of that for us.
Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. Well, I've got a bunch of things I want to get into, and, I want to talk a little bit about the rod design history and get into some casting tips and things like that. I guess before we jump into it, I had a couple of questions from some people out in the Facebook group, and Sam wanted to know, on glass rods, are you guys thinking about bringing in some glass, or have you started? I don't know. Do you have any glass in your lineup now?
We do not. We use all carbon, but we have discussed it. It's funny. I have quite a few glass rods. I have one all the way down to 5.5 foot. I use for short little spring creeks. And I tell you, there's certain inherent advantages to glass, especially with regards to tippet protection. It's just unbelievable how that glass can protect tippet in terms of fighting fish, and sometimes big fish on small flies. And also it loads so short. You need very little back cast room behind you, but it certainly is different, and it's not for everybody. But St. Croix doesn't do it right now. We've discussed it a couple times, but right now we do not have a glass offering. Gotcha.
Okay. Well, let's just start a little bit, maybe take us back. We've talked a little bit about some of the history. I mean, most people probably know there's the, go through the bamboo days and all that stuff, but can you talk a little bit about like a brief history of maybe just talk about rod design? Doesn't necessarily have to be fly rod design, but just a little bit of like how St. Croix, I mean, you could take back 70 years ago when the company started, but maybe if you go, do we want to talk 70 years before that, or does it make sense just to start when St. Croix came into the game?
Well, I think I could best represent the picture of where things are right now with regards to rod manufacturing. And I would tie conventional and fly under this umbrella. In terms of the technological advancements in rod manufacturing, certainly since I've been with St. Croix, but even in that, 10, 20 years prior to that are pretty remarkable. And like all industries, when you have competition, it really breeds good things for the angler, because we're all trying to come up with something to give the people the advantage. And what I've seen specifically to St. Croix, technological advancements with regards to the mandrel were really the foundation of rod manufacturing. It's the carbon steel center ground. It looks like the car antenna, I guess is one analogy I use, but St. Croix has total control over the design of that. We actually were, we use a mandrel called IPC, or integrated poly curve, and people can check that out on our website, but it's very, very unique to fishing rod manufacturing, and certainly in fly rod manufacturing. It allows incredibly smooth we call it actions or deflections in conventional, but as a fly casting instructor, I get very, very, very detailed about my loop personally, to the point where I get videotaped every single year and I watch it. And it's amazing how rod manufacturing, throughout all the different stages of it, there's actually 32 hands that touch every St. Croix rod before it gets to the angler. And some of those stages, certainly the mandrel, the pressure in the roll, the curing and the fibers in the oven, all these things can attribute to where we are now, which is to produce unbelievably smooth casting actions. And it's really neat to see that progress because, 20, 25 years ago, some of the rods I worked with, they'd say 6 and they'd throw a 7. And just a lot of companies started making fly lines that are a half line size heavy intentionally to get these things to load. There's still some element of that today. But I think there are purer actions now than there ever have been in fly. And that's a tribute to really all manufacturers.
Yeah, that's when it brings up a good point. When you talk about, I was just at an expo actually today. I'm at the Fly Tying Expo, and I just ran into a company there that I hadn't heard of, and they showed boats. They had their boats out on the floor, and then I looked over, and all of a sudden there's a whole line of rods, and then they're like, "Oh, by the way, we have a whole line of our own rods." So, it seems like everybody's got their own rod these days. Do you see? What's your take on the industry now? And imagine a lot of them's coming over from overseas and stuff, and you also hear the thinking of the talk that you can't buy a bad rod. What's your take on all that?
Well, I obviously would reflect a little bit of bias there because I'm 20 years in St. Croix and I know what we do. And with regards to vertical manufacturing, in other words, having complete control, all the design work and control all the way down to the mandrel is paramount in terms of creativity, being able to react and put rods on the market that fit our vision way better than if we had to rely on any type of subcontracting overseas, beyond the shadow of a doubt. Now, that being said, I would say there are a lot of great fly rods on the market. Matter of fact, there's still quite a few that are made right here in the USA and go through all the complete vertical control all the way down. And even some of the ones that come from overseas, I've casted all of these rods, Dave, show up to my casting classes. There's not a fly rod out there literally not one that I haven't had in my hands because they all show up every year. Because somebody's got one, I pick it up and test drive it for, a couple minutes. So I would say they're definitely not all created equal. And I would say that there are a lot of tremendous viable options for the angler out there, but having total control in the manufacturing process does separate some from others.
Mm-hmm. And do you guys have, you probably have in your lineup some of the the less expensive rods and then the higher end rods. What is the difference between, the two? And if you look at your lineup?
And that's a great question. Usually when you look at higher end rods, and I would say this about conventional too, for sure, versus rods where manufacturers' price points start, would be componentry and certainly technology. For example, with regards to St. Croix, when you get into our high-end product, componentry is one thing. Everybody can do that. We can put our EC recoil guides on something or, the different reel seats and nickel silver and on and on and on. And there's no question those are more expensive than using lesser priced componentry. But with regards to technologies, that's, in my view, what really separates fly rods with regards to performance. And that's what's most important to me. Because with St. Croix's manufacturing process, for example, we use the integrated polycurve mandrel that certainly people can check out, but we also have multiple technologies in our factory that have taken decades to refine. For example, when we sand a blank, that blank can be sanded differently depending on where the sander hits along the blank. The belt has to be changed out a couple times a year. We have a master craftsman sander at St. Croix. That's just one example. Another example would be the pressure in the roll. Another example would be the cutting of the pattern. We use a computerized cutting pattern machine, which is really unbelievable in terms of consistency and accuracy. So I would love to invite any listener out there to come up and tour our factory. We're actually doing that. We're openly inviting people to tour our factory. It's a phenomenal experience.
And where
what
is your
it'll
factory?
really do. Park Falls, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
I just left it today, actually. I just got home a few minutes ago. I was up there giving a couple tours and training events in the last couple of days, but it'll show people how these things are put together because they are not all created equal.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds like, we could definitely talk for an hour just on that whole process, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll keep moving along here because I definitely wanted to get into some of the casting tips since you have a long history there. I did want to touch on one more. I was talking to, like I mentioned, I've had these rods. I remember using those back in the day. Do you guys still do the blanks? Can you still get a blank and build a fly rod?
Yeah, you can get them. We've actually rechanneled our blank distribution. People can do a search on Rod Geeks, and when they search that, they can get the St Croix technology through Rod Geeks now with regards to getting a blank. And basically, what happened to us, Dave, to be perfectly honest with you, is our demand has challenged us so much that we are 100% focused on finished rod product right now. I mean, and that's a great problem to have. And I thank every single angler out there for putting us in that position. But that's how people are to get our blanks now, so they can just do a search on that.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Okay. So, and this question kind of goes back to, coming from Greg, he was asking about some of the older rods, basically, is there a difference in the action of the older Imperial rods, like the ones from the early 2000s compared to now? And he says, I've always thought they were medium action, but I've been reading the newer ones are faster. Has there been a big change since the last 20 years with St. Croix?
Greg asks a great question. Imperial's a 50-year-old USA-made series, and it's had multiple reimagined designs to it. And I would say, generally speaking, the newest version is slightly faster, but it's certainly not, I wouldn't call it fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely not extra fast. But there are fly rods out there that I see show up with people that I teach that are so fast that you can hardly feel until you got 30, 40 foot of line out. Imperial is a silky smooth casting rod. Now, if he goes back to the one that he found 30 years ago, I would call that really a straight moderate, and I would agree with him. Some of those are almost fish between carbon and glass in terms of how slow some of those rods deflected, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, especially for spring creek fishing when our casts are so short. A stiff rod can kill us, that, for a lot of reasons. But I tell you, Imperial's our number one selling fly rod, and the newest version that we just reintroduced last year is it's just been amazing. I'm telling you. I mean, I pinch myself whenever I cast it compared to other rods that I cast out there. We're really blessed to have in our lineup. Yeah,
I think I saw you had a video or two out there. I think I watched one of those on some of the rods. Because do you get around? I mean, are you doing your job? You're the national sales manager.
National accounts manager.
So you get around to all the shows and do the circuit, and so people can meet you out there at some of the shows.
Yeah, we basically, for example, I go to the Bassmaster Classic next week, and I have fly casting things that I do in different cities, and I shoot almost all of our fly product videos that people can see out there. A lot of them are on YouTube. Certainly on, Googling through St. Croix or hit my name or whatever, or like if you hit some of the like Mojo Bass Fly or things like that, they'll come up and you can watch those. But, like all of us in national sales, we're like water bugs, Dave. We're here one day and 3 states away the next. And I'm kind of a tough guy to catch up with for sure, but I would love to meet your listeners. That's for sure.
Totally. Well, what do you love most about the traveling and doing all that?
Relationships.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in this business, without a doubt. I mean, it's been unbelievable, the people that I've met. And when this road ends for me, someday I'll look back on the relationships that I met and that I built, and the friendships that I've created have just been a true blessing.
Yeah.
It trumps rod sales times 1,000 to me. The people in this sport are so passionate, and we all share a common thread. And you can run into a fly fisherman on the water that you've never met before and start a conversation like your best friends. And it's hard to explain to people out there that don't fish to really understand that. But that's absolutely my biggest takeaway from this.
I hear you. I agree. I just started. Actually, I'm building a new little group. I'm putting together a little component, a segment of the people that listen to this show. And it's been really fun because I've been reaching out to a lot of the small and medium-sized fly fishing companies and just meeting a bunch of people. And the show circuit I missed this year, but I think I'm going to hit it next year. And that's been the fun part of it, just meeting those people and hearing the stories. I was curious, because since you do have the experience on the gear side and the fly side, do you see a lot of difference between, the people involved? We have talked a little bit about conservation on this, the difference between, it seems like fly fishing, there's a big conservation push, but are we all the same people, or do you see a difference there just between, generally speaking, the gear guys versus the fly guys?
Well, I think gear guys or conventional could be categorized as well. There are very traditional conventional fishermen that have barbless hooks and wet their hands and 100% catch and release, just like fly. Then you have your backwards hat, 70 mile an hour bass boat, competitive type. And there's nothing wrong with that. Matter of fact, competitive bass fishing has raised unbelievable funds for preserving fisheries and stocking programs. And, so there's upsides to all of this. I would say, generally speaking, every category of fisherman, regardless whether it's a conventional angler or a fly angler, has tremendous passion, and some of them practice that passion in different ways. They're all really interesting to me. The fly fishermen, generally speaking, I would say have a tremendous attention to detail. We're working with light lines, obviously very small hooks, and in some situations, and that's been the biggest eye opener for me is some of the guys that I know that fly tie are just, at a very, very high level, are just the consummate professionals in their sport. Yeah. They never feel like they'll completely master it. And it's fascinating to me to watch that.
No, I hear you. In fact, this last few weeks, I had a guest on, and he did an amazing job describing, the breaking down the entomology piece and some, information like that. But I received a call or an email from somebody that kind of called him out and was like, he's not really describing the, the insects or the bugs quite the way it is. In fact, it's wrong. So, that's one of those things where, I guess you can do this your whole life and still be a fisherman, but not necessarily know the entomology or be the nerd and know, be the expert, but you can still catch tons of fish. So, it's like you're saying, it's all different levels as far as you want to take it, right?
I tell you that the number one takeaway to this whole podcast for people listening out there is that constant pursuit to learning. And all of us, every single one of us, we're learning literally every time we go to the water. And kudos to the person that presented entomology on your podcast, and kudos to the one that called them out on a fine detail or whatever it was, because there's so much information out there. It's literally overwhelming. But one thing I've noticed, being a conventional fisherman and a fly fisherman, is there's times I have to match that perfect with a certain size imitation. And I could give you 50 of them in a trout example, but then there's other times where you want to throw something that's the exact opposite. And believe me, and I've talked to a lot of the folks that I fly fish with, and there's like, boy, they were on a, whatever it is, a size 20 PMD. And if that's all you were throwing, you'd catch them. And if you threw anything else, and I'd go down behind them with, 3X and a big bugger and clean up behind them. So you just never know. That's why we have to have our blinders off. We need to remember these fish are opportunistic, and sometimes the less we try to micro analyze things as a fisherman, sometimes we just kind of let nature take its course and let the fish tell us what to do.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. Well, let's get into a little bit on the fly casting, because I think, I've talked about fly casting on this. I mean, I've definitely dug into some of the spey casting. I'd like to keep this to single hand casts. I think that's what you've done a lot of. And I just recently had Joe Humphries was on the podcast back in episode 73, and it was really interesting because he talked about breaking his wrist and how he does this certain cast that he really breaks his wrist, really. And when I grew up teaching people, I've never been a certified instructor, but I've taught a lot of people how to cast, and I always said, keep your wrists stiff, right? You don't want to break your wrist. So it was funny when he said that, because it surprised me. Maybe I want to get into the whole breaking it down if you had a beginner, you're trying to teach how to cast, but starting off, what's your take on that?
With regards to breaking the wrist?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I actually do, but I don't break it tremendously. My wrist will absolutely move. It is not static. And I think, and again, there are a lot of ways to teach fly casting. And I have been next to a lot of phenomenal fly casters, a lot of them. And I've seen a lot of different styles. And one thing I kind of related to the golf swing. You'll see a lot of different setups. Certainly you'll see some different forms and different cadences and back cast speeds and so forth. But there's a couple of moment of impacts that are very consistent. And it's the same thing in golf. And what I mean by that is we always need to stay connected to the fly line for sure. And the back cast I find beyond critical. And the back cast is set up by obviously stopping the rod at the right position with regards to the angle in which it's pointing. But secondly, we have to accelerate to that abrupt stop to create that line to follow the travel of the tip. And it's critical, because the one thing we start talking about in the beginning of a fly casting class is the importance of, obviously we get into hand position and we lay the line. I have actually little black marks on my lines by the tips where everybody goes out to that black mark. So we make sure we have a very castable, teachable, consistent amount of line out amongst the class.
How much line do you recommend?
It's right around 19 to 20 feet, depending on the fly line. I use a lot of SA lines, to be honest with you, and that's it just is what it is. I've let it out so much and marked them. That's pretty close to where it's at. But when we start talking about the nuts and bolts of fly casting, the first thing I see people do, and I think a lot of instructors out there listening to this would agree with me, is people tense up. They overgrip the rod. And as soon as you do that, as soon as you take your hand pressure because of nervousness, it's like shooting a free throw with 1 second to go to win the game.
Right.
Every muscle in your body tightens up, and that's what creates that stiffness, and you lose your fluidity. So we really teach to relax the hand, relax the muscles. And we talk about a couple certain important moments that are very critical in the fly cast. One of them is certainly the end of that back cast, that flicked stop where you come up and you hit that stop. It has to be relaxed, but it definitely has to be accentuated. And you really let the rod cast itself. And it's fascinating to watch people get that. In a very short period of time.
Is 10 to 2, is that still something, something that somebody's brand new when you tell them? Because finding that place to stop is kind of a struggle, right, to starting off?
I think the way I teach it, Dave, is not necessarily 10 to 2, but I will tell them is stop with your thumb pointing up. Think about that. Those of you guys listening out there, if you put your elbow into your body and you pull your hand up with your thumb pointing up, you'll notice the fly rod is slightly pointing back. You can call it 10, 10, 30, 10, 15, whatever. The last thing I would do is want people thinking about a time, because if they think about, now again, this is me talking, but if you think about a time, 99% of people are going to come back farther than that time.
That's right.
I guarantee it. I've seen it 1,000 times. So what I tell them is to stop with your thumb pointing up. And that rod's going to be slightly pointed back whether they like it or not, but it won't be too far back. And it with a very relaxed hand. And that is a very easily repeatable, teachable mantra that I've actually very rarely heard taught. But it's worked really well instead of giving people 10 to 2, because the more we empiricalize things, the more we put numbers on things, the stiffer people get. They turn into robots, at least from what I've seen.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, and when you do it, that makes sense. Yeah, stopping up high. So, yeah, I mean, I think that as far as questions and tips, I mean, is there a common, when you see people, maybe they're a beginner, they've been casting a while, but a common struggle or thing that you see a lot of questions that people have when they first get going?
Well, I think every instructor on the planet would say people bring the rod too far back. No question about it. And another thing most people do is they have the conceptualization or the visualization that they're trying to throw something in front of them. Matter of fact, one of the first things I do in my class, I'll pick up a rock and I'll say, this is what we're trained to do if we're trying to throw something out there, and I'll throw it. And I'll say, now, if we were going to throw this in a fly casting motion, it's completely counterintuitive because we have to throw it behind us first. That's not the way we throw a baseball when we grow up as a kid. We don't come back and stop behind us when we throw a baseball. It comes back in one motion, and everything. Our whole focus is forward, 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 and that's the kiss of death in fly casting, because people need to understand that line speed has to be created behind you first. That's what loads that rod. The forward push with the thumb allows that rod to unload, and if you don't get the speed up behind you by throwing a good back cast, the fly cast is killed. And one thing I mention to students all the time, I can tell from 50 feet away when I'm watching a line of people, when the rods go back, which cast is going to be good and which ones aren't before they go forward every single time. Because you can tell by how that line is starting to load behind them, slightly ascending, because they've stopped that tip at the right spot. And I would also add, a lot of people accelerate too quickly off the water. The fly cast should be very slow in the initial stage. It should accelerate slowly and smoothly throughout the stroke with an accentuated stop at the end. And people talk about the tailing loop and all these things going forward. A lot of times what I see is it's the same thing in reverse order. People speed up that cast too quick. They get punchy. And that's what forms that line speed to become inconsistent. You see the loop tail. It's the same thing going behind you, too. You can't speed up too fast. Don't rip it off the water. Matter of fact, a lot of times you'll hear me say slow, 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 flick stop. To get people to get that line moving first. Get the line moving first before you pick it up. Those are some things that, Dave, to be honest with you, are, pretty teaching common with other people and, 30 years of seeing all the mistakes I certainly made and others as well. Yeah.
Well, and I was thinking, as you come with the forward cast, I think it was Lefty Cray that said, imagine you have a paintbrush in your hand with paint on it, and you want to basically throw the paint at the wall without dripping it. And you kind of, how you would do that with a paintbrush, and you just kind of, you slow, and then flick it. Is that the forward cast? Is that, I'm not sure if I'm getting that right, that analogy.
Well, what Lefty used to say, that the forward cast stops so abruptly, your eyes roll in the back of your head. And I'll be honest with you, I've casted right next to him before.
Yeah.
He was unbelievable. Absolutely.
What made him, what was his, as far as the casting, why was he such a good caster for those that have never seen him?
I honestly think I can answer that. He was a very, very powerful guy. He had very strong hands and forearms, but he had incredible finesse. And that's a lethal combination for a fly caster. He was able to relax and be very fluid, but at the same time, he was a very powerful guy. But what Lefty Cray did, I would argue as well as anybody, maybe ever, is those accentuated stops in his fly cast with regards to the back cast and the forward cast. And those come at the end of each stroke, not the beginning. And I remember watching him out in Denver years and years ago casting. We were both up on the fly casting lane out there. And I just sat there and watched him for a while. And he absolutely had the most accentuated stop on the end of his forward cast, where he just literally looked like he was frozen in time. And that line did whatever his tip did, period. It's almost like there was no negotiation for that fly line to do anything different than what he wanted to do. He had tremendous command over the tip of the fly rod.
This episode is sponsored by Deli Fresh Design, a company that makes sustainable fly fishing gear in the heart of Denver, Colorado. Deli Fresh blends old waders and recycled sailcloth with Cordura canvas to make rugged, river-tested gear such as fly wallets, sling packs, and my favorite, beer koozies. I had a great chat with Ross at Deli Fresh and was blown away by his dedication to fly fishing and conservation. Here's a short clip of how Ross reduces waste with his personal actions and as a responsible company.
But as a company, I'm trying to reduce my impact by riding a bike or taking the bus or shared cars, stuff like that for commuting. And then, when I go fishing, I'll get in a car, but I try to go with other people. And so I think there's things that as consumers that we can do on a daily basis. My own mentality of doing those things on a daily basis, like driving or riding a bike, and then trying to see what materials I can use that reduce waste, or what I'm trying to do as a person and as a company.
Pretty good stuff, right? Let's support a great company doing business the right way. All of DFD's gear will help you spend more time casting and less time juggling your stuff. To see these products, go follow them on Instagram, where you can see their latest designs. Find out more, visit delifreshdesign.com.
Well, you mentioned the tailing loop, and so I think what you mentioned is one way to avoid the tailing loop is just be consistent on your speed. Is that the biggest thing, or is there something else we missed? If somebody has a tailing loop where the fly, and maybe you can explain it, that's where the fly is kind of tailing and sometimes even gets tangled around the line. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, the tailing loop is in my view one of the most difficult things to correct, because a lot of times it happens with people that have been fly casting for a long, long, long time.
It does.
And they've got a tailing loop.
Yep,
absolutely. So here's what I recommend to correct the tailing loop. Number one, and let's talk about a tailing loop with regards to the forward cast. You've already set up your back cast. Let's assume everything's good in the back cast, but you're tailing it going forward, which is when it happens. That's when the tailing loop, you'll see it go out. You'll see the line almost looks like it ducks up and underneath out there. You can see it if you do it. Certainly from the side, you can see it. There's a couple things that we teach on the tailing loop. Number one is make sure when you start the back cast, don't get punchy. In other words, don't punch that thing in the beginning of the back cast. What that does when you do that is it speeds up part of the line, and the other part has to play catch up. And the line that is out there behind you, throughout the length of that line in the loop, if you can imagine, you've got a bunch of line behind you in a back cast, and you start to come forward. That line's pretty straight behind you, slightly curled on the top. If you punch that, it has to make that circle really quick, and it comes around, and you have inconsistent speeds within that line. And another thing that we do to alleviate that, and this is a little harder, but you got to visualize it. And it's one way you can take it away, but it's not necessarily something we want to go with. Eventually, we'll want to tailor it back. So follow me on this. You get the line behind you on a back cast, and everything's set up fine. Take your thumb on the way forward and really take it over the top of the cast. In other words, don't let the bottom of your wrist dominate the fly cast coming forward. Take your thumb and try to push it over the top of the cast, and it's almost impossible to tail a loop if you do that. And the reason why it does that is as you start to come, and again, this is a very accentuated motion to get rid of a tailing loop. We don't want to cast that way all the time, but it's one way. It's for example, it's like if you're slicing the ball, aim way left. It's one way, it's all one way to get past. It gets past the visualization of a tail. But what it does is it creates more consistent speed in the forward cast because your thumb takes control of the butt section of that rod. And it's not like that real quick acceleration a pitcher would make in baseball. That's a killer in fly casting. When you speed up too fast in the beginning of the back cast, it should be a smooth, accelerated speed with the stop at the end, a good forward cast. So I wish we could almost attach video to this because it's very difficult to explain that.
I can. I'll in the show notes of this episode will be at wetflyswing.com/74, and I'll try to find a couple videos that that can kind of show what we're talking about here. Do you have anything?
Excellent.
Do you have anything out there that describes this on your videos?
No, but you can see, I don't have a video that describes it verbally, but if there was a video up there, you could attach the verbiage and folks could understand. Because what you'll see if you watch a very efficient fly caster is you'll watch the line set up behind them. And as they come forward, it's a very smooth move forward. The accentuated stop is at the end of that forward cast. It's not a punchy push at the beginning. That's what causes all kinds of problems. It's the speed transition in the fly cast should build both ways. It starts smooth and graduates going back, and it starts smooth and graduates going forward. That's the best way I can explain it. And if you watch a video from the side, you'll really see it.
Yeah. Okay. No, those are great points. I did hear, I think it was another show you were on, and you're talking about pike and muskie rods and things like that. Is that something you've done a lot of fishing for? And I'm not sure, what is your home river, if you had to say your home waters that you fish?
Well, boy, you name it now, being more national. But I was just down in Mexico last week, filming videos for an upcoming Bassmaster Classic. I live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. But yeah, I did do a podcast a while ago on pike and muskie, and you talk about a fly fishing target. I mean, I'm telling you, that's just an absolute riot. And there's people out there doing a really good job marketing it, and you're starting to see some rods tailored for it now for sure. And that's right. It's really getting fun to see the creativity of fly fishing reach beyond trout is really exciting.
It is cool. It is cool. Yeah, I'm actually just starting in the destination season that we're in right now, and yeah, I mean, I'm trying to cover as much as I can, and there's all sorts of species from, African tigerfish to, pike and muskie. I mean, there's just a bunch of destination spots. So I'm hoping to get around and get people on that can cover it as I go. But yeah, I was thinking maybe we can bring it back just quickly back to the St. Croix history. I had Tom Rosenbauer on, and he brought us back to Orvis back in 1856 when they started back. And St. Croix isn't quite as old, but it's probably one of the older companies we have out there. Can you, again, just talk about how, where that started, how St. Croix got into it, and when it got into it, did it have fly fishing from the beginning?
We originally built conventional split bamboo 71 years ago in actually Unity, Wisconsin. The factory now is in Park Falls, Wisconsin. The current owners, it's a family-owned company, and the current owner's father came to Park Falls in 1977 to turn around what really, to be honest with you, was a struggling company. To see where we are now compared to them is a true testament to the core values and beliefs of the owners of St. Croix, to be quite frank. And we became, in my view, strong in fly, really probably starting in the 80s, early 90s for sure. And then there was a giant quantum leap because people started to figure out the value of the verticality of manufacturing, or having control over the complete manufacturing process. And I remember one of the rods that, Imperial was, like I said, it's a 50-year-old series, and it's a tried and true series for diehard fly anglers, really globally. One rod with regards to a performance rod with a little more speed. I remember I was doing fly casting classes, as I mentioned earlier, for a different company at that time, at least helping a guy that worked for a different company. And I remember seeing the St. Croix Legend Ultra for the first time. And I remember casting that rod, and I couldn't believe it, how smooth that was. Absolutely could not believe it. And it just took off like a rocket ship for there. Now we're working. Matter of fact, just yesterday, I was casting a new design. I can't talk about it yet, but I do a lot of the finished test casting on the fly side for St. Croix. And I was in a gymnasium yesterday casting a rod that we're going to launch next year that it absolutely blows my mind. I had the engineers with us a month ago, and I casted two versions of it. We had the two most popular fly lines out there with us to do it, and we were obviously inside. They got 50 inches of snow up there, but I noticed a couple of the versions were a little soft in a certain section of the rod, specifically at 40, 45 feet of line out. I could really tell there was a soft spot. Our engineers literally in 1 week, through 3D printing on the handle and blank deflection manipulation in 1 week. Called me and they go, "We got another prototype. Next time you're up here, we're going to try it again." I'm not kidding you, Dave. I can't wait for people to get their hands on it. I cast them yesterday. I threw one of them 2 times and I started laughing. I handed it to our engineer and I said, "This ball is still flying." Absolutely nailed it. And that's the example of having control.
Yeah.
The fact we can communicate with our engineers directly right here in Park Falls, Wisconsin is a really, really neat thing to be able to give the angler the advantage.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, definitely that is, I mean, I don't understand everything that's behind rods, but I mean, I can just start naming off, rods, about Scott, Orvis, G. Loomis, Sage, right? I mean, there's so many rods out there, and they would probably all say, likely a similar story about the process and how great they are. I mean, what do you think when you look at it? I mean, obviously you're going to, say St. Croix is the best rod, and I know it's a great rod, but I'm just curious, like when somebody's out there trying to pick a new rod, how do they know whether to buy a G. Loomis or a St. Croix, or or do you think it really matters?
Well, first of all, I would say I have the utmost respect for every brand you mentioned, and I could mention 5 or 6 more. I mean, these are great companies and really pillars in our industry. I'd throw, a few more in that list as well. But with regards to brands, these rods do cast a little different, and it's funny how certain companies have their own feel. I can definitely say that about Scott. Some of their trout rods, and certainly a lot of the Sage rods. As I mentioned, I did casting classes with a guy that worked for Sage for 8 or 9 years in Wisconsin. He was from Wisconsin. I used to do them in Iowa, and then I've casted a lot of the Orvis product. All these rods show up to my casting classes, and fascinates me that they do have slightly different feels. There's no question, but I am just very complimentary about every single brand that you mentioned, and I don't really try to steer people away from anything. I kind of tell them our brand story.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people attach to what you stand for and what your values and beliefs are as a company as much or more than what you actually make.
Yep.
And all these companies you mentioned, and I huge kudos to the whole fly fishing industry, because we all have a story to tell and all are great stories, and anglers attach to certain brands for certain reasons, but every single brand you mentioned is awesome. And I would throw us right in there for sure.
Well, and I mean, I think I think I agree. I think all those companies I mentioned are all big, as far as in the fly fishing space, are all some of the biggest companies. It is interesting because I'm reaching out to some of the smaller, like I mentioned, smaller to mid-sized companies. And one of them that I think is going to be part of, maybe this group we're putting together here is Moonshine Rods. And I'm not sure about the entire history of this company, but they're basically, a small company getting started early on, have a good, product. It sounds like building a cool, community, and that's just one company out there. And again, who's to say who you choose, right? I mean, maybe this company has a great rod. They obviously probably don't have the money behind all the R&D you guys are able to do, but it's just, it's an interesting thing, because I think that, especially for, somebody new, I think you just grab a rod and get going. But somebody that's maybe looking to step up to the next rod, that's a hard choice sometimes. But I appreciate your feedback here on just the St. Croix process, because it is interesting to understand what makes a good rod.
Well, and again, it's funny because I have people show up to, I did a casting class for the American Substance Abuse last year here and locally for a couple different reasons, but a lot of people show up to support that. And I had a lot of different brands of fly rods, and everybody from around here knows who I work for, and they'd walk in kind of sheepishly and kind of hide the brand of their rod. And it's so funny because as I start casting and we start talking, we get into the nuances of the sport and the passion for the sport and the rod brand. And for me, the driving force for me to do what I do is to pass along passion and hopefully help people be better on the water, regardless what rod they're using. I'm being perfectly honest with you. I think the more people we get into the sport and help them become successful, we all win. And that includes our fisheries. So I just think it's we're all in this together, and it's St. Croix has its story for sure, and I tell it proudly. And we have a unbelievable loyal customer base, and I appreciate every one of them. And in the same breath, I would say when I teach fly casting, I have a much more broad look at getting people into the sport, whether it's a gateway price rod or whether it's the guy or gal that's been casting for 60 years and hung up with a little fine tailing loop. I mean, we work with all of them, and that's the fun of it for me. It is just, continuing to try to help people be better and learn myself along the way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I think the podcasting space is the same, the way I feel about it. I don't think it matters. I want to see more fly fishing podcasts coming into it, because I think the more, the better. I think that's just good stuff. So, okay, well, let's, we got a little bit of time here. I had a few more questions I wanted to jump through. I mean, we talked a little bit about, kind of the history piece there on St. Croix, but, looking at your story, and I think you mentioned, we talked a little bit about when you got going. I guess you've been an instructor for quite a while. Can you take us back to that moment when you knew you were all in on the fly fish, or just on fishing in general? Because making a career out of fishing doesn't seem like it's the easiest thing to do. Can you take us back to that moment when you knew this was your thing?
Oh, I could go way back. I'm not kidding you. I mean, like fourth grade.
No,
I was
kidding.
on a field trip. Oh, absolutely. I was on a field trip, and I was walking along a boat dock, and there's kids running all over the place, and I saw a bluegill under that dock and the little cracks in the dock, and no matter, at all costs, I wasn't going to catch that thing. And I found a piece of line on the bank with a gold hook with a dried up night crawler on it. I picked that night crawler off my fingernail, laid on that dock to the point where the teachers were yelling at me, and I finally got that thing to bite. And I got it up to the crack in the dock, and it got off because I couldn't get it through the crack of the dock. And from that day forward, God put me on this earth to fish and to help people in this industry. And there was absolutely no doubt. I used to run home from the school bus every single day, throw a MEPS number 3 around a pond and catch 2 10-inch bass and go home and think I was the best bass fisherman in the world. And when I got into fly fishing, it's been literally a true blessing. Let's take Jen for an example. Yeah. The only reason she and I are, Jen's one of my best friends, and we've shot a couple videos, fly fishing videos together that I'll never forget. And there's no way I would have ever met her if it wasn't for fly fishing. And that's a classic example. So I've been all in for a long, long time. And I think that what I would ask people to do is open up your views of different types of fishing. I did an article years ago on catfishing with a fly rod. I was using a woolly bugger, just smoking them on a reservoir when they were up on the rocks in the spring. And we've done, fly fished for, muskie, tarpon, bonefish, trout, smallmouth, largemouth. I'm shooting a TV show this spring on smallmouth up in Wisconsin, fly fishing and bass. And it's just, if you take your blinders off, it is a phenomenal, phenomenal sport. Let's not get hung up on trout.
No, yeah. There's all sorts of species you can go for. I got a few more questions before we get into a little bit of a rapid fire round. One of them, just as far as a resource, do you think for when you talk about fly casting, if you'd recommend, you mentioned you have some videos. Are there any other resources, books, magazines, videos, anything you would recommend for somebody who wants to maybe become a better caster that maybe can't get into pay for a instructor right now?
Yeah, there's some videos, to be honest with you, that are old, that are still very fundamental and very sound. Your basic fly casting. I know SA had one. I know there's some old Lee Wolf, Joan Wolf things out there that are still very, very sound and fundamental. And I could go on and on with these names of these folks that have done things like this. So, again, if you look at, you're going to hear the more you get around and work with different instructors, a lot of us have our own different slight nuances with regard to the way we teach, but the basics, the fundamentals, certainly in the back cast and the forward cast, really are universal to a large degree. And I would say that you don't have to spend a whole lot of money and go to a super, super expensive event or something like that. The big thing would be to, stay relaxed and try to be detailed and try to understand what that video or book is trying to explain to you. And the biggest thing that I would try to put in people's minds before they learn to fly cast, especially if they're on the beginning side, is let's remember the fly line is a carrying vehicle for the fly. That's a diametric opposite to conventional, where the lure weight pulls the line out of the reel. It's opposite.
Right.
And we need to program our mind that we need to get the speed of the fly line up, and that pulls the leader and the fly. So it's a completely opposite mindset. And it's one thing we really talk about in the front side of our classes, because people go, oh, really starts to make sense. Because if you think about that, you stop thinking about trying to throw everything in front of you. You automatically start thinking something has to pull something. That is a whole nother
right.
psychological way to look at it. It's very, very helpful for people just starting out.
Okay. And do you have, this is, it doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of fly fishing gear, but just a top piece of gear you use, whether that's traveling around or out fishing, that you kind of don't leave home without?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Give me about 50 of what? I'll tell you this. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say this on the conventional side too. I won't even let people in my boat without polarized sunglasses.
Okay.
And there's two reasons why I say that. Number one, I had a Griffith's gnat in the back of my ear once from a person I was guiding. And I also I've been leader whipped about 3 or 4 times. And granted, I've been teaching for a long time, but glasses in terms of eye protection where fly fishing is very, very, very important. Everybody listening out there, everybody that's listening, that's done a lot of fly fishing, has had that one instance where you're coming back and you're trying to steeple it back behind you and you get the wrong crosswind and that leader and line blows across your face. Everybody has had that happen, and it only takes once. So I would say the best piece of advice I could give out there is wear your glasses. Don't mess around. It's not worth it.
Gotcha. And do you have a brand or a type of glass, company that you like to use?
Well, there's a lot of them out there. I personally wear Wiley X. I shoot all my videos with Wiley X, and they're they're a military grade. I wear them just as much for protection as I do for vision under the water. But sure. To be honest with you, Costa Del Mar, unbelievable stuff. I could go on and on with glass brands. The main thing is wear something. I'm pretty vehement. Absolutely. If I'm fishing around people, or certainly people in my boat, or whenever I did Spring Creek guiding in Northeast Iowa for quite a few years, and it was non-negotiable. You just have to wear your glasses.
Nice.
We had short casts and little flies, and these things are, laser sharp, and you just gotta use your head on that for sure.
Nice. Okay. Well, let's jump into this rapid fire round. This is just a quick little round. I got some questions we could answer, some random, some not so random, and we'll just jump through it as we wrap things up here. So looking at, obviously since you were 4 years old, fly fishing, or not fly fishing, but just fishing in general, you've been into it. But, if it wasn't fly fishing, if fishing wasn't your career, what do you think you would have done?
It would have been something outside. Beyond a shadow of a doubt. You put me in an office and box me in, I go stir crazy, man. I got to be outside. Yeah. So it could have been possibly with the DNR or who knows, but I absolutely have to be outside. And I would also say that about water. I have to be around water for whatever reason. I don't know. I live close to 2 lakes now, and I just can't be away from water very long, or I almost get like in a withdrawal.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. No, I'm the same way. And so you manage, I guess you probably have some office work you have to do, but are you able to do kind of a 50-50 thing, or how much do you get in the office versus getting outdoors?
Well, I'm very fortunate because when I travel in the industry that I'm in, we're either testing something or we get to go fishing. Our office is in northern Wisconsin, which is just covered up with lakes. So work and fishing go side to side, hand to hand with what I do. And do I get stuck in the office? Absolutely, and more than I would wish to be. But we get to get out quite a bit, and I think you have to. I think the only way you can really give people an advantage on the water is if you practice it yourself and you strive to learn every single day. And that's one thing I've always tried to do, Dave, is just get better every single day in everything that I do. And I'm always listening and trying to learn from other people just insatiably.
Yeah. Have some of those other people, do you have a few mentors or anybody you want to note here that's helped you get to, where you are today? Nobody would know this guy, but back in when I was in college, it was
John Husingfeld. Nobody will ever hear of him. I saw him up at our factory up in Wisconsin about 2 years ago, and he came in, and I was actually teaching fly casting out in the yard, and he was the guy that I saw do that in my boat and actually, bring up all those bass that day. And sometimes it's things like that have moved me more than watching a Lefty Cray or, I've worked with Bruce Richards personally casting St. Croix, testing rods side by side. He and I did it up in a gymnasium, and that obviously moments like that throughout my career are awesome. But that one moment with that guy way back in my boat, that left-handed guy that nobody's heard of, is the one that really moved me more than anything else.
Cool. Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, I've had a few influences along the way as well, and some of them I hope to get on the show, and some people would never have heard of these people. But yeah, it's pretty amazing, those people that the unsung heroes, right? Those are the ones.
Absolutely.
So okay, and so as far as music, this is kind of out there, but I've been loving to check in with people if you have a favorite, either a band or a type of music that you listen to.
Well, my favorite player is my brother, and I tell you, for those people out there listening, I just shot a fly fishing video for Imperial last fall. I shot a video in Wisconsin on that rod, and Imperial was 2 years ago with Jen Ripple. But last year I shot Mojo Trout, St. Croix Mojo Trout. And the background music that you guys are going to hear is my brother on acoustic guitar.
No kidding.
And it was so awesome because he sent me this link a while back, and he's like, dude, listen to this. He's a phenomenal guitar player down in St. Louis. And you can Google him on like Steve Johnston blues and whatever. It's fun to listen to him. But in any case, he sends me this link, and it hit me. I immediately picked up the phone, called the guy, one of the camera guys that shoots me a lot, and I said, you got to listen to this. I said, if this isn't a fly video, I don't know what is, and nobody's got anything like it, because it's my brother. He did it in a studio.
That's sweet.
So you guys are going to see that. It'll be hitting our website and hitting Facebook pretty soon here. Okay. It's the background acoustic music in that fly video is my brother Steve. So that's who I'm going to call out.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. I'll get a link out to that again at wetflyswing.com/74. When that comes out, I'll make sure to have a link in the show notes and maybe get a video there if there is one. What about, if you get off the river or lake or whatever, do you have a favorite beverage you like to, at the end of the day or after you get off?
Leinenkugel's Honey Vice, man.
Really?
I'm from Wisconsin. Oh yeah. I mean, I toured the factory in Chippewa Falls, or the brewery, last year. And I just think that they make a lot of really smooth tasting beers. I love to have a beer when I get off the water and just kind of relax. And, sometimes you learn more about fishing. At least I do. Yep. At the end of the day, when I sit back and I reflect on what I've done, and I can sit there and watch things happen on that stream when I'm not sitting there attacking it, is when I learn the most. Right. Without a doubt. And I'm thinking back, boy, maybe I should have tried this or tried that. And a lot of times that's with a nice cold lining.
All right. Awesome. Yeah. I'll try to find that one as well. How about, this is an interesting one. I've been checking in with people, and there's been some interesting replies, but on sports, were you ever, back when you were a kid or whatever, did you ever get into any sports specifically other than fishing?
Yeah, I played some basketball. I played golf actually competitively in high school and junior college. And that's why a lot of people hear me use a lot of golf analogies, because there's a lot of similarities. I mean, there's 1,000 ways, if you watch professional golfers, how they take that club back. But where they set it up, and at the when I talk about that moment of impact, you talk about lefty flicking the paint off the brush. Professional golfers are the same way at the moment of impact. You watch the way their wrist is, the way their eye is, the way their hands are. There's a tremendous similarity between great players for years and years and years. They all do the same thing right at the ball. And if you watch really efficient fly casters, that moment of impact, especially at the end of the back cast, has frighteningly similarities all across all walks of life. And that's where sports attached fly fishing to me for sure.
Yeah, I was thinking, obviously there's some big names in golf, and I've played a little bit of golf. I was never a great golfer, but had a time where I went into it. But Who's the best right now? Is there like somebody like the old, Tiger Woods back in the day was the best, but is there somebody out there? Do you still follow it?
I do a little bit. There's so many of them. I tell you, and this is true in fishing too. It's these young guns that are so impressive. It's these 20-somethings that are really starting to take over. And yeah, it's really fun to watch. And matter of fact, like I mentioned, I'll be going to Knoxville, Tennessee next week to the Bassmaster Classic, and a lot of these guys are, some of them in the, around that sport are so good at such an early age. And I did a podcast on this a while back. I attribute some of that to the abundance of information at our fingertips anymore. I mean, we can literally do a search and learn, at least, I'm not talking about cutting our teeth on the water, physically learning it, but in terms of the conceptualization of an idea or a strategy or equipment or anything, 1,000 times faster than me being 51 the way I had to do it when I was 20. There's so much information at our fingertips online and YouTube, and it's really helped people get better faster, for sure. Certainly in all sorts of fishing.
Yeah, and in the Bass Master Class, I mean, that is really interesting. That subject's come up a few times on this show. I've talked to everybody from Kelly Gallup, who we had a great discussion on that one. He talked about how a lot of the stuff he invented or created in fly fishing came from the bass guys. Some of the stuff they did. Can you take us, maybe tell us more about what that Bassmaster Classic, if you've never been to one, what it feels like when you go there? Because I think the picture I have, and probably a lot of people have, are a bunch of like NASCAR looking guys and this jacked up thing on steroids, the fishermen in these fast boats. But can you take us to your perspective on it?
It is the Super Bowl of bass fishing. There is certainly an element of that, but there's also this was the main point that I made on a recent podcast about this topic. Was there's a moment, especially towards Sunday, towards the last day, where there are thousands of people that have never met one another, that are sharing a common thread and focused on the finality of this tournament. And we're all this big cohesive network of anglers that you could talk to any one of them and act like you've known them for 20 years. And, all fishermen out there, and, it's funny, working for St Croix, I work with all different types of fishing, means and ways, and, freshwater, saltwater, fly, spay, everything. But what I will say, there are certain stereotypes that get thrown out about certain types of fishing. But the way I see it is, although we have different ways of doing it, certainly different ways of expressing our passions, there is a love for the sport, a love for the fishery, a love for the challenge of trying to trick Mother Nature that is shared amongst all of us. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it time and time and time again, whether the guy's got we call them scare jerseys in bass fishing, or whether the guy's the river runs through it, right, pipe smoking, guy or gal, there is that passion for fishing that is universal. That's what I love about this industry more than anything else. Yeah, that's cool. It's pretty awesome that you're able to straddle the line between the two, because a lot of people never even try. Well, I think a lot of people probably start out with a fishing spin rods just because that's a good way to get started, but never go back. Well, here's something. Here's something I will say. We're talking about having an event down in Mexico. A good friend of mine owns a lodge down on a couple lakes down in Mexico, and we're talking about having a challenge, conventional versus fly. Now, in that venue, I'll be on the fly side of it, and going against a conventional team on seeing who can do better in a given day. And I'm telling you, it's going to be a dogfight, because that fly rod, when you get the fish set up right for bass, first of all, you can throw double rigs very effectively, obviously, but we can put some things in there in shallow water more delicately than a conventional guy can or gal can. And there's times where I did an article for Bassmaster magazine a while back in fly fishing. There are times where a fly rod, not always, certainly when we get real deep, I wouldn't say this, but there are times when they're shallow, when they're keyed in on something. The Hex Gina is the best example I could give you on smallmouth. You key that in, it's hard for a spinning rod guy to beat you. I mean, if you key that in, you catch everyone you cast to with a fly rod. And it's really, really cool to be able to talk to people about that do both, because it invites them to try it.
Yeah. Do you find, no, that is a great point. On staying on the bass subject, I mean, we have a lot of struggles just with impacts from humans and things like that, ups and downs of salmon populations and things like that, salmon, steelhead, trout, whatever. Is bass, does it have the same struggles, or is it, it's kind of more, or is it more of a durable fish that there's really no issues out there with the bass fisheries?
I think all fish have an element of fragility. I think we all have to practice personal responsibility, regardless what we're fishing for, and if you see something in the water trash wise, pick it up, don't, I did I expounded a little bit on a interview a while back about not overfighting fish, for example. I think one thing I would say is some of the bass fishermen, the fact they get that fish in so fast, like in the new Major League Fishing format, that fish is landed way faster than a fish comes in on a fly rod. That's it's not even close. Yeah. And they're weighed and released immediately. So I could be a voice with regards to that being very good for a fish. And I think that can be factually substantiated versus building a fish up with lactic acid by overfighting it for 5 minutes. So I think we all have to share personal responsibility and be good stewards of the fishery. And, I'm a huge believer in catch and release personally. I'll keep a few crappies, need them every winter ice fishing, but I'm very careful about trying to not overfight them and, making sure a lot of times you release them the right way. And I just think if we all do that, everybody wins. Yeah.
No, it's well, that's probably a good place to leave it off. I did want to check in before I let you go in the next 6 to 12 months. Is there anything, we can expect from you or St. Croix coming up here that to keep an eye out for you?
Yeah, matter of fact, keep an eye out for something that's going to launch in July. I'll leave it at that for you fly fishermen out there. I just finished a test casting on it, like I said, yesterday up in Park Falls, and I'm doing backflips. I'm really, really excited. I think, to give people a little bit of hint, it's going to fall into a family of rods that's been around for a long, long time, but it's going to fill a subcategory that is super exciting for us.
Oh, perfect. And do you guys have you jumped into the, do you have like two-handed spade rods and all that stuff?
Oh yeah. We do. The vast majority of our fly rod sales are single-handed casting rods. Yeah. But we're into all those categories, and our sales reps out west are really, really good at that, and that's obviously much more of a niche. But there's also different things coming. You've got your trout spay, mini spay is really fascinating to me. I was out running out in Montana with our sales reps a couple of years ago, and it was really cool to see that branch of the industry gaining steam. And it's just I kudos to the industry, because there's a lot of creativity out there and a lot of brands doing a really good job, and the ultimate beneficiary is the angler for sure.
Yeah. All right. Good deal. Well, I guess if people want to find you, we can send them to stcroixrods.com. And is that?
Yeah. stcroixrods.com is our website. You bet. And, they can communicate with our factory directly that way. And I think one thing about the experience that people would have is, again, we are angler centric. That's our entire focus. We literally treat people like family, and we welcome everybody.
Great. All right, Dan. Well, I appreciate you coming on here to share some tips and tricks and a little bit of the history on St. Croix. Like I said, for me, it was funny when you're talking about the timing, in the 80s and 90s. That's pretty much, I grew up around a fly shop, and I remember that in the 80s and 90s when St. Croix came in, because I'm not sure what we were using before, but we had a good period there where, there was, it seemed like 20 years where that's pretty much, we were selling a lot of them. But it's awesome to hear, from you, your experience and sharing all the tips and everything. So I'll keep in touch with you, and thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks so much for having us on, and thanks for everybody out there for listening in. Greatly appreciate it.
Okay, we'll see you, Dan.
Take care.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes with all the links we cover, just go to wetflyswing.com/75. I'd love to connect you with some of our member partner companies and help you along your journey. You can go to the Wet Fly Swing Member Society, where we're supporting local companies, the podcast, and you on your journey. That's wetflyswing.com/members to find out how to get exclusive discounts and bonuses from our member partner companies. Thanks again for stopping by to check out the show today. Looking forward to catching up with you soon. Maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.